Boom. All right. I'm assuming that there's people slowly filling up on whatever platform this thing is zooming on. It is nice to see y'all tonight on the 7th of March. Welcome to the second annual Wordplay Festival brought to you by the Loft Literary Center here in Minneapolis. My name is Dinesh Smith. I'm one of the Loft Wordplay Advisory Board members. It is so exciting to welcome y'all to this event tonight with three amazing writers, some new to me, some kin to me, some uncle to me. This is going to be a very bright conversation, I believe, for our life and hopefully for yours too. Get out your pens and take some notes. Thank you for joining us. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the third annual, I lied, Loft's Wordplay Book Festival. Virtual Wordplay is a presentation of St. Catherine's University and Star Tribune, and is a St. Catherine critical conversation. We acknowledge that the state of Minnesota is located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. The Loft and Open Book are built within the homelands of the Dakota people. The Loft recognizes the original peoples of this place and affirm the tribal sovereignty that they still hold sacred to this day. A few housekeeping items before we get rolled into this joint. You can ask the authors questions by clicking on the Q&A function. We will get to those in the latter half of our time together tonight. This event will be recorded and you are welcome to access this event as many times as you would like until July 1st. Next, please buy the author's books by using the link below. While you're there, consider donating to the Loft. All of Wordplay's events are free, like many of the Loft's wonderful events, and we'd love your support in bringing great authors into your life in the years to come, especially as we here in Minnesota hopefully return to some in-person events. I miss the Target Theater so much. I miss walking up those stairs and getting to see people in their books. I miss it so much. And please, please, please take the survey that you receive at the end of this session. It helps us know what programs and events that you want to see. All right. With no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for tonight's discussion on the white gaze. I almost said white gaze, which is a whole set of people that I don't like talking about all the time, and Black performance. We have an amazing panel of writers tonight. We have here Hanif Abdurraqib, who is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. I'm sure he will let us know that a couple times tonight. If he's not the poet laureate of Ohio, that needs to happen very soon. His poetry has been published in Pen America, Muzzle, Vinyl, and other journals, and his essays and criticism have been published in The New Yorker, Pitchfork, The New York Times, and Fader. His first full-length poetry collection, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, was named a finalist for the Eric Hoffer Book Award and was nominated for the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. His first collection of essays, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was named a Book of the Year by NPR, Esquire, BuzzFeed, O Magazine, Pitchfork, the Chicago Tribune, Air by Nim. Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest was a New York Times bestseller and a National Book Critics Circle Award and Kirkus Prize finalist, and was longlisted for the National Book Award. His second collection of poems, A Fortune for Your Disaster, won the Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize. He's a graduate of Bencroft High School. Tonight, he is here with his book, A Little Devil in America, Praise Towards Black Performance. If you have not copped the third essay collection by Hanif Abdurraqib, you need to go get that shit now. Links below. Next, we have Mateo Askaripour. He was a 2018 Rhode Island Writers Colony writer in residence, and his writing has appeared in Entrepreneur, Lit Hub, Catapult, The Rompus, Medium, and of course, elsewhere. He lives in Brooklyn with every other writer in the world, and his favorite pastimes include binging music videos and movie trailers, drinking yerba mate, and dancing in his apartment. I'm sure we would all like to see the TikToks of that. Black Buck is his debut novel. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Ask Mateo. And last but certainly not least, we have Douglas Kearney, who has published 6 books, including the award-winning poetry collections Buck Studies, Somebody Took Their Tongues, and his criticism. That is his libretti, Someone Took Their Tongues, that he published, on top of a whole bunch of other poetry collections, and his criticism Mess Ann, which Douglas Kearney, it's criticism, but it blurs that line. Are you reading criticism? Is it poetry? Is the nigga just good? Of course. His newest collection of poems, Show, is out right now from Wave Books. A live album, Fodder, featuring Kearney and frequent collaborator Val Inc., will be out in 2020. 2021, a writing writers and Foundation for Contemporary Arts Tawli Award with residencies and fellowships from Cave Canem, or awardees, sorry, with residencies and fellowships from Cave Canem, these white names, you messing me up, the Rauschenberg Foundation and others. Kearney teaches right here in Minnesota at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Welcome, y'all.
What's up, Tanette?
I was following along with Douglas's bio. I was like, what's he gonna do with Rauschenberg?
Man, I can't read shit. I didn't know what Douglas expected me to do with that. I can write, but I sure can't read.
Just gets in the way. You don't need that. Really don't be reading shit.
All right. So let's not waste any time. I got some questions for y'all, some silly, some serious. I'll save the silly ones for later. But I wanted to start off, the first thing that you read when you come into this event with our 4 Black faces is the white gaze. And so I kind of want to talk about it, see if it has any use for us, and then get it out the way if it doesn't, right? So my first question I want to ask for y'all tonight is the white gaze a useful onlooker to you in your work? When you were writing these books, how, if at all, did you find yourself contending with the white gaze on or off the page? Is they looking something that you actually deal with when you come to your work? Or I'll say this, Mateo, we were actually talking before the conversation started. Actually, let's deal with that. And then I would like to know after, what do you do with their looking once the work is in the world, right? Yeah. How do you contend with white people viewing you even after you done made the thing? Because sometimes they say wild shit and ask dumb questions.
Nah, I mean, I don't know. I can jump in first if y'all want. All right, cool. Yeah, I think about the white gaze a lot. Just because it's like somebody throwing something at you when you're wearing like nice clothes. Right? It's like somebody throwing like dirt at you. But it's also sometimes I think the idea, like some people are throwing it like actively trying to get you dirty, and some people are throwing it going like, no, this is loam, this is soil, you'll grow as a result of my gaze, which is also the dirt and the sun, right? And so there is a way in which to understand, I should say the way in which I kind of think through moving through the world is oftentimes in this contention between, whether I'm being read, misread, what do I want to do about that? And because the white gaze is just, historically has been just as likely to watch a music video as a lynching, right? That conflation of entertainment and brutality is sort of ever present. So it's difficult to think through critical consensus or opinion without thinking about how far someone's getting pushed toward one of those intersections. Violence, brutality, but entertainment. They're not opposites, they're oftentimes entwined. And so that's something I think about a lot.
Right. Thank you, Douglas.
I'll say with Black Buck, I didn't give a fuck about it. Right? Like I acknowledge it on the first page. Doug and I were talking about that. The author's note acknowledges it. Like, yo, I know you're going to be reading this book, non-Black people and especially white people, but this joint right here is for Black people. And, do what you want or do what you must in order to get yourself in the headspace to read this book. But by no means was I looking to be your tour guide into Blackness or say, take my hand and I will show you what it's like to be this Black man. Like I wasn't trying to do that. That's not to say that there weren't times when I was writing the book and I was like, yo, this could make some people big mad. But then I just kept going. If I had white people in my mind as I was writing Black Buck, I wouldn't have included certain jokes that I made, because then they would have been made in mixed company. And the question then would have been, are they laughing with us or at us? So I just tried to push it out of my head. Now I'm also understanding that there are limitations, because there are things so embedded in me and things embedded in many of us in this nation from when we're kids that it's in your subconscious and it can come up in your work and you can be ignorant to it to a certain extent. But what allowed me to write Black Buck with the freedom that I believe that I had was because I had written many essays beforehand when I was trying to get on. I was like, let me get these credits, you know, at some of the places that Dinesh mentioned, you know, Medium, Entrepreneur, LitHub. Let me get some of these credits. And some of these essays were about traumatic experiences. And the question for me then was like, yo, am I just writing trauma porn? Like, who's consuming this actually? Who am I writing this for? So working through that, deciding to write these pieces, knowing that I could face the brunt of white gaslighting and working through that then allowed me to come to Black Buck with more of a I don't give a fuck mentality.
Thank you, Mateo.
My short answer is no, because I'm I don't think about it. It doesn't serve use to me. Partly, I'm just a big Toni Morrison disciple. And particularly when working on Little Devil, the question was, well, wouldn't this just be more enjoyable if I removed any notion of whiteness or just remove that from my imagination? Then could I have much more space to play? This reminds me of, before Little Devil got published, the New York Times Magazine ran an excerpt that you were in, Dinesh. I'm sure they fact checked with you, the Spades piece. And right as it got to the last minute, a white editor was like, well, we noticed, through another editor, funneled through a Black editor who brought this news to me. They're like, we noticed he doesn't explain how to play spades in this piece. Can he maybe give a couple lines? And I was like, will you ask the editor why? I would love to know why this person thinks that's a requirement. Because I didn't learn to play spades personally by someone telling me about it. I learned to play spades by sitting at the table. And I'm inviting people to the table. And that's simple as that. But also, in writing Little Devil in America, I had to do a lot of research into Black vaudeville performers. Burt Williams, folks like Black Herman. And there was this trend, not a widespread trend, but a trend of Black performers dying on stage in white audiences thinking that it was a part of their performance, right? Like Burt Williams notoriously passed out on stage, was passed out for several minutes, and white folks were applauding. And then later he died. Black Herman died on stage, right? And so when I actually think about the usefulness of the white gaze, I'm also thinking about the limits of white American and global, but specifically American capacity to actually fully see Black people as folks who are people beyond suffering for the name of their entertainment. So like steeping myself in the vaudeville tradition and seeing how those performers were stripped of their humanity actually does not, of course these people aren't literally dying, but actually does not ring that distant for me as when white people were so satisfied with Stacey Abrams and the first thing they did was like strip her of her humanity. It was like, oh, she should be in a Marvel movie, or she should be like a half human superhero, and that kind of thing. So I think about the actual utility of the watcher and not just who's watching.
Yeah.
So I want to jump back. New question, and this is just off the top of my head, forgive me, but it's off of what Mateo said, right? This notion of mixed company, right? And I would say all of us are very Black writers who are writing towards Black people, sometimes cussing white people out too, right? But we're often writing with this notion of mixed company. I'm wondering for y'all, how do you, and this is maybe, I don't know if this is about the work or just about the self, how do you handle being very Black in mixed company? Is there wear and tear that you find with that? How do you protect yourself? I'm wondering. Because with Hanif, I think your book shows us that there is a real danger, right? You're talking about these Black folks literally dying on stage and maybe mixed company. How do you insulate yourself, right? How do you protect what is Black and sacred within your work, even though we're sort of writing into the mixed company that is the publishing industry? Or is there a protecting? Do you just say,
I don't know. I mean, like for me, if someone comes on some clown shit, then it's just like, I don't really pay attention to it. For me, I've realized in this, with publishing my first book, not all feedback is created equally and not all opinions are created equally. And I mean, I'm just going to keep it real, right? If someone writes to me, a Black person writes to me and they're like, yo, man, I wasn't really like feeling your book because of this, that, and the other, it's going to hold a lot more weight than a white person. I'm just going to be completely honest because of who I had in my mind while writing the book. Of course, I'm grateful for anyone that takes time to read my novel because you know, we're all going to die one day. You can't get this time back. So for me, yeah, it's just sort of trying to keep at the forefront of my mind and in my heart as much as possible that I don't have to play into all feedback or critique or this, that, and the other. And I'm also not going to perform, right? I think that's at the crux of, or I don't know, it was in the title of this talk, the performance. I'm not here to perform for you. I'm not here to be your minstrel. I'm not here to die on stage, as you're talking about, Hanif, for your viewing pleasure. I'm here to do what I want, put my books out there, hopefully positively impact many people and keep them moving. The last thing I'll say is that if I do sense that someone is trying to commodify my Blackness or strip it of its humanity and use it just for their utility, I typically just try to, you know, keep it moving. You know, an example of this is Black Buck takes place in an office in a startup. So I've been speaking with many organizations, many businesses, and most of them, you know, come correct. But once in a while, it's like, tell us what to do. Just tell us what to do in our D&I and, you know, diversity and inclusion and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, yo, I can't really tell you what to do. I'm also not here to give you a pat on the back. I'm not D&I certified. I just wrote this book and like I lived through it, but I'm not certified. So yeah, it's tough. I'd be curious to hear what everyone else says.
Yeah, in Little Devil, there's one of the essays where I break down what I feel the difference between love and consumption is. Mm-hmm. And what I found just in my own life and experience is that the Black folks I love and I'm close to, and the ones that I'm still traveling towards and don't even know I'm traveling towards, do not as easily confuse the two, or do not as easily think the bridge between the two is very short. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes I think that one, you know, I've made peace with the fact that once your book enters the world, you don't really have any control over how it's received or who receives it or what they take from it. And so I have immense gratitude for anyone who takes anything from it. But there are some guardrails I've maybe built in. I mean, in the Magical Negro essay, I think I do a good job, or I try to do a good job of turning the lens to make sure the audience knew I was speaking to the audience and naming the audience. You know, there's so many direct address switches in the book, more than I ever had before in any other book. And I think that's because in my work and in my life, but particularly in my work, because it's happening in my life, I'm very invested now in the setting of boundaries that is very touchable and not imaginable. If I can't control what happens in my work when it enters the world, I can still control what's on the page. And I can still control the clarity that's on the page. But I think a lot about the distance between love and consumption, and how the confusing of that distance is where I find myself getting into trouble most with so-called mixed company, is that, you know, someone loves something you wrote and then desires an access to your life, but wants that access without an understanding of your life. And I feel like that is, you know, that's the problem. I got to stop. I'm up to kick to Doug because it's Ramadan. I got to break my fast. So I've got to stop talking.
Yes, please.
Finally, water. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, love and consumption. First of all, like, you know, when I was first speaking earlier and I talked about critical consensus, that's precisely what I'm thinking about. Not appealing for it, not going for it, but understanding that when there is an opinion formed about your work, right, that opinion is oftentimes not easily demographically shifted. So the question becomes, you're in a gaze. The moment you decide to be public, you're in the gaze, right? Mm-hmm. And so how that impacts might not be that you're writing to appeal to it, but being aware of it is something that I think is interesting. But to the idea of love and consumption, in Mesan, something that I write is, if you're going to be consumed, if you're going to be eaten, try to be poisonous. Capitalism works by being able to absorb and sell whatever the hell, even books that are against capitalism, you can buy at a bookstore. So the question is, what are you giving? What are you making available to anybody in your work? You know, the idea of turning and saying like, this is just for Black people. This is just for Black people. This is just for Black people. Man, like Public Enemy, their fan base was huge. They weren't trying to speak to white people, but they saw them at their damn concerts. Mm-hmm. I saw more people with Bob Marley stickers on their cars in California with white drivers. So like, to me, that part of it, like that's a part of the trap. Like, no, I'm just gonna speak to Black. Yeah, that's they have the music that is now popular music. It wasn't for them. Not necessarily, but they were like, oh shit, and I can amp this shit up. So to me, it's like, what's the difference between, I'll just leave it there. I'll just say like, how can you be, if you're gonna be consumed, how can you be poisonous?
And I think poisonous is only one part of it though, Doug. Right. Right, because I think that does become a question of mixed company and the danger of it, right? Because I want to write. I've written books that I meant to be poison, right? Yeah. And I wanted to make sick that thing in somebody, right? That I needed it to rot out. But also, like I see in Hanif's work, right, the thing that you can be ate by the homies too, right? But your work can also be a feast for them, right? Like Hanif is literally writing like in praise of Black performance, right? Mm-hmm. Not like the problem or the contention of Black performance within the white America, right? Like, look at this shit, right? It can also, I think we can. I hear you on the poison, right? But I also maybe am also here for like, can we be mana, right?
Which, I mean, I will say this, and that was the whole thing with Little Devil, where it was like, at first, The Little Devil in America was going to be a book about minstrelsy and appropriation. And then halfway through, I was like, this isn't really serving me, because even when I don't want to write about whiteness, taking this line of inquiry centers whiteness even when I don't want to. It did serve me because it helped me get to the greater part of the book. But what actually shifted the book was, I had a friend of mine, I begged him to send me a hard drive of Doug, I feel like you've heard this story before. I feel like when I was in the class, I told the story. Send me a hard drive of every Soul Train episode from 1971 to 1989. And it's one thing to grow up watching Soul Train reruns in the 90s. It's another thing to be like fully immersed in the world for a decade and a half or whatever the fuck. And there was nothing that I could take from that experience of watching all that, but to say, look at this shit. You know what I mean? Like, to run to the page, just be like, yo, look at this shit. I can't believe this shit. And that's the entire thing that propelled the book. It was like, yo, can you believe Josephine Baker? And there's nothing else. It's not like, can you believe Josephine Baker, comma. It's just like, can you believe Josephine Baker, period? Because the miracle of our living deserves to be a feast for us, right? And especially if we can untangle it from some of the obsession with trauma that the country projects upon us.
Amen. All right, I'm gonna stop there.
I just want to just say one thing real quick.
Yes, please. Say two.
Okay, I'll say two. One of them is, what poisons one person doesn't poison everybody. So what I need is to not be thought of as, I'm saying, you're doing this and therefore you're not doing this other thing. Authentic love for Black cultural production is poisonous to fucking capitalism, to the white gaze, because they don't get to have it as a thing that's traumatic. I'll say the white gaze, I'll be more precise than capitalism, like white gaze, because your love is not about them. So like, I can eat a grape, that shit'll kill my dog. I can eat chocolate, that shit'll kill my dog. But I'm gonna enjoy me some chocolate. So what I'm saying is that it's not so simple as I'm saying, if I'm thinking about poison, that's me walking around going, oh shit, this shit hurt. Like, nah. Like what is the love that Hanif is talking about? Right? So I just want to throw that in just to make sure that I was being clear.
I hear that. And I see that even in show, Doug. I mean, like, there are things that I'm sure are poisoning the mind of a white reader, asking them to be critical about the world that they're involving, that like my Black ass kind of knows, and I'm just sort of left to delight in your linguistic wonder then, right? Now I'm just like, this nigga showing out, right? And that's food for me, you know, even though somebody else is getting their little racist mind, you know, that they didn't even think was racist, tripped out, I'm getting to enjoy. Okay, so I hear where you're at. So I want to also, so I'm gonna ask a couple of spotted questions for each one of y'all. But before we get there, time just goes so quick. I was thinking this whole time of Paul Laurence Dunbar, right? The We Wear the Mask joints. We're Negroes. We do this. We know that poem. And I want to ask, I know that poem sort of gets at both the delight and the sort of grief or the sorrow, the heaviness of that mask. But I'm wondering for you in your work, because all three of y'all approach these books in such craftful, skillful, wonderful ways. I'm wondering, as a writer, what mask does your work allow you to put on that you sort of gleefully welcome? And also, what sort of mask does your work allow you to take off? What does it allow you to reveal within this work, right? So I'm thinking about the happy mask. Sorry, Paul. I'm not dealing with the happy one, the sad ones today.
That's a great question, and I'm gonna let somebody else take it first. But let me just say, do we know where the great Paul Laurence Dunbar hails from?
Yeah, we do.
Aiden, Ohio, home of funk music.
Okay, I'm convinced that every good poet might just have to either, like, you've at least driven through Ohio one time if you're a good poet. So we can just say that. But y'all got a lot of them.
My wife is from Ohio, so I can't really complain.
Yeah.
I don't think I got any connection but respect.
Love Bone Thugs.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm a big Kid Cudi fan, so there we go. Yeah, all right. So this is tough. The mask. I don't know. It's like when I think of my book, I think of it actually as like a face tattoo. Like I can never get a job like I used to have if people read this book. I'm saying a job that I used to have in like the world of tech startups and corporate, because I'm not hiding behind anything in this book. Not all of the views are mine, of course. There's many opposing views in this book, intentionally so. But if someone reads this and they're like, do you actually think these things? I would say yes. I'm not hiding behind the label of fiction. A lot of people like to cast this as satire. I've actually never used the label of satire myself. There are satirical elements, of course, absurdist elements. But at the root of it, I could see all of this shit happening, to be completely honest, as I was writing it. So I don't hide behind those labels. If someone asks, is this what it is? I say, this is what it is. But I think the book did give me freedom, again, talking about the audience, to just go free, to not have to, to not have to translate spades, to use Hanif's example, to not have to explain certain things. There was a freedom and there was a joy, and I had so much fun while writing the book. That's not to say that certain parts weren't difficult, but I think this book and the aims that I had for it and the people that I wanted to serve with it allowed me to come to it without a mask and speak about it without a mask. I will say, though, to something that Doug brought up earlier in terms of having an audience in your mind, I knew, and this wasn't like any marketing scheme or anything, I just knew that even writing this book for Black people and being on my Toni Morrison and being articulate about that was going to activate voyeurism. And for non-Black and white people to be like, yo, I got to check this shit out. Like, what are they saying? What did they say when we're not around? Or what did they say amongst us? Is that and the other? So to Doug's point, right, not being able to control your audience, and Hanif's point about not being able to control who perceives your book and responds to it afterwards, really resonated with me.
That's dope, because so I want to just respond to that real quick. That's really dope, Mateo. I learned this concept the other day, ontological expansiveness from whiteness studies, which is how white people like sort of lay claim to everything, right? Both every language, every dance, every culture can be mine. And I love this notion, right? We can't really fight it, but we can't make white people stop being white, but we can sort of set up these, like you're saying, these boundaries, sort of put the face tat on that maybe scares them a little bit, and find that of use too. Cool. Doug, Hanif, any responses to this question, or we can keep on charging forward? We're cutting short on time here.
I'll let Doug take it if he's got one.
I mean, it's funny to talk about mask. I mean, as the poem suggests, there are war masks, there are battle masks, there are all those kinds of different ways of performing and ways of being present in a poem. I mean, something that I oftentimes think about is like, if you come to writing and you are writing or refining or distressing or amplifying some part of your perspective of your life, then to me, sometimes the term persona poem is kind of a redundant thing. Not because you are lying, but because like your whole self in any singular piece of writing is a difficult thing to imagine actually happening. You're going to say this here, not because you're trying to kowtow, but because you are going to be focusing on one specific thing. But I think that overstates like the question, right? That overstates the idea. I think that when we talk about what the mask most likely translates to for me when I think about it as a technique or as a tactic or as a counterfeit or whatever, is what happens when you use a register of diction that sounds like it's coming from academia, right? You just dropped ontological expansiveness, right? Right. So that is a term that immediately is going to make some ears go, what? And immediately make some ears go, huh, right? So how do you use that response? And I'm not just talking about white people. I'm talking about just in human communication, which is something that, we're ostensibly doing. So like, how do you work with the expectation that a certain voice, a certain persona in your text presents to do something different? Maybe it's not subversive. I don't have to keep it locked in that spot, but surprising. How do you shift between these different modes and possibilities? But I think that the history of that poem automatically being one in which we think about it as, the very specific context that the poem is written about to speak to, I think makes this a really kind of fascinating and compelling question. I also think that just like generally speaking, like, it's hard for me to think about the history of a poem like that and separate it from how technology and entertainment have changed over the 20th, 21st century, which is to say your ability to curate your own experience is not just like, oh, this makes it easier for me to see my shows. I really don't think people think about how much that impacts writing and our attitudes towards writing. Because we can curate an experience in a way that, most people have not had access in the past. It was either, like you'll hear like people talk about, there are only 4 channels. Well, I mean, literally there were. So like every single, your choice was turn it off and not watch TV or do something else. Well, now, you can watch all kinds of shit that you choose. And I think that does change the cultural idea of audience. I think that changed it really significantly in ways that are very exciting to me, but we don't always unpack.
Right. Damn, that same thing, you made me think about just the changing shifts of like audience, how also that changed performance as well. I'm thinking about when hip hop became digital, right? And even poetry, right, went digital, and we lost a lot of regionality, right? There was no longer, you didn't have to sound like you were from the South to be from the South,
And I mean, sorry, go ahead. My bad. I was getting on the whole thing. I was getting on the whole thing about hip hop. I'm thinking about this because I was thinking about and I'm working on a really long thing about Big Crit, and which has led me to think about the digitization of hip hop and that broadening of hip hop, that where it when some of the regional pins were removed, but still there was this presence of not just white folks, to be honest, but also Black critics who unmistakably understood the South as an aesthetic form, but we're still kind of bristling at it in its real face. I'm just remembering Big Crit when he first came out, everyone was like, well, I don't understand what he's saying. Like, how can he be as good of a rapper when I don't understand him? When like, he's perfectly understandable. You know what I mean? Like for anyone who has spent an hour in Mississippi.
People saying they couldn't like understand like what he would like literally like.
Yeah. Like couldn't understand what he was saying. I mean, this happened with this happened with Outkast too, but on a much lesser scale, right? Because what Big Crit happened like in the blog era. So it was everywhere. And this became a thing in his career. And I always think about how that too is, I mean, in hip hop, there are tons of examples of this, of how the gaze, sometimes our own biases and our own gaze seeps into the things that we purport to love when the world gets a hold of them, right? And the kind of widening of the hip hop lens that, or the maybe third or fourth by that point, by the 2000s, 2010 to fourth widening of the hip hop lens that happened, I think really made it difficult for Southern rappers.
Well, since we're on this question about style, I guess, and what also, I'll just take a moment to say, if y'all haven't listened to Big Crit, run. I think Return of Forever is my favorite. Find it on thatpiff.com. Also, for our audience members, if y'all watching, please remember that you can send your Q&A questions at any time. If you have a question that pops up, send it into that Q&A function, and we will make sure to get to those at the end of our program. But I want to ask y'all each some questions just to let y'all dig into y'all ways and talk y'all shit. So Douglas, I'm gonna start with you, if you don't mind. Just because like Show is such a surprising collection. I think as like a fan of your work, right? What you have sort of built, and I think you're still up to your linguistic wildness, but gone, especially in a poetry collection for you, is that that signature visual style, right? The poems that scale everywhere. Not to say that you're still not thinking about the page as a sort of canvas, but this is the Douglas Kearney collection that looks most like a book of poems, right? Like a standard book of poems. At your most tame, still a wild nigga. And so I'm wondering, what was it about the mission or the poems in Show that resisted that graphic play? And how did you find that performative energy that you bring to every project? How did you find it magnified or maybe different now that you had some tools that in your toolbox that you were actively ignoring?
Oh my gosh, wow. You asked the question, Dinesh. Like, when I was putting together Show, the thing that I've always thought is that the worst thing that could happen is that if I have the performative typography poems, and they're only like a couple, they look like a gimmick, right? So each book has had more and more and more of the typographic stuff. And when I was putting together Show, I began to just think about, it was reaching this kind of place where I was like, I want to try something that I've never done before, which is I wanted to have a shorter book, and the design makes it pretty much just as long as everything, but like the manuscript form it was shorter. And I was like, I want to have like just 2 sections and have it be perfectly symmetrical. And so I was just like running out of space, right, to have the amount of the typographic poems that I really usually like. Now, that for me was a kind of risk, right? Like experimental, in my opinion, is a process, not an aesthetic. So for me, the experiment of Show was, what happens if I don't do any of those poems? What happens if I have to take the things that I've learned about proximity as an organizing context, like if I have 2 words on a page that are not a part of a sentence, but they're next to each other, a reader will start to draw connections to them on like a page that's an open field. But what happens when I begin to take the kind of disjunctions and the kind of ruptures, the cut that you hear when you're bringing together 2 different tracks of language? What if I figured out how to write that syntactically in a Microsoft Word sentence? What happens if I internalize the process of the cut so that it's no longer a kind of external feature, right? But it becomes a part of the logic. And that is where I was trying to go to with this idea of double jointed syntax, because if you don't think about like English as being broken when people are using it, so that, if only they knew how to express using standard English. No, a double negative means a thing, right? It's not abject. It means something that usual sentence formation, the standard sentence formation, is incapable of meaning. That ontology is possible. And so I was beginning to think about, how can I just write a sentence that feels like that? But what's hilarious to me is the newest collection I'm working on, called I Imagine I've Been Science Fiction Always, is pretty much all typographic poems. And in fact, collaged in Photoshop and not InDesign. So the whole thing about it is I literally can't read them. And so like thinking about that book, I can't read them aloud. And that to me is really an exciting idea.
Word. Beautiful, Douglas. You took my second question right out of my mouth. It was basically going to be, how does Douglas Kearney write a sentence?
God damn. Masterclass and a half. Holy shit.
Look, for real, for real. All right, I'm gonna go to Hanif next. I'm kind of going oldest to youngest in terms of time in the game. So Hanif, you be writing. That is literally what I wrote. A Little Devil in America has essays that becomes poems, that become shout outs, that become altar calls, that start to address the reader right away, that become like, they do everything, right? They swerve from stories plucked from Black time and also back to your own life so effortlessly. These essays, I felt like were literally dancing. I want to know, how did your performance on the page, in terms of your sort of freeness navigating different, switching from mode to mode, from even within the same essay, how did that evolve as you delve deeper into this study of Black performance?
That's a great question. And I think it's best answered through Stevie Wonder, as many questions are, I think, because, during this process of writing the book, I spent so much time immersed in Stevie's 70s run, that run of albums in the 70s, in part because I was working on Lost Notes at the time and it just required that. But also, I love songs in the key of life, and I spent so much time with it. And for some reason, the myth of Stevie Wonder, I think, because he's just so more gifted than pretty much anyone, is that the work is easy. And so you listen to songs in the key of life and everything falls into place. And you're like, well, and there's not a lot of stories, there's not a lot of mythology around it. But that album almost killed him. That album took 200 people to make. It took hundreds and hundreds of hours. He spent millions of dollars of his own money to get the equipment to make it. And all of this stuff made me think about the machinery that goes into the unseen to make the scene seem seamless, which meant that for the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about structuring a book. I wasn't thinking about the work of structuring a book like an album. I was thinking of the work of structuring a single essay like an album. And then scaling back and saying, how do I structure this like a song? Right? And so when I wrote They Can't Kill Us, which I still love and proud of, whatever, it was like, well, how can I make this book feel like a really hard but long double album? And then I looked at stuff like the Whitney essay in Little Devil. And it's like, well, I want this to feel not only like a song, but I want this to feel like I want to dance with somebody, like mechanically, meaning not just sonically, but emotional arc-wise, right? Where when I get to the part of that essay where I talk about her coming back out on stage and finding a Black dancer and falling into his arms, I want that to feel like the major crescendo at the end of I want to dance with somebody, which has to be earned by whatever else appears before it, right? Like I want to dance with somebody works because the kind of meandering verses earn out the chorus every single time. And then the final chorus is earned in a way that it was unmistakable. And so every single time I took to these essays, I was thinking about sonic and emotional structures that perhaps serve me as a writer in the actual, writing about Aretha Franklin. I writing about Amazing Grace has to feel like that moment in Amazing Grace where she kind of is on another planet and James Cleveland is crying, walks away from the pulpit and starts crying and the choir's throwing shit at her. That is what the essay has to feel like. It has to get people out of their seats, I think, physically, literally, but also emotionally, also spiritually. And so to put that on myself and to task myself with that gave me a lot of room to play and a lot of room to ask hard questions of myself and kind of earn the crescendos as Whitney did so well so often.
Bro, and I think you did that. Honestly, Hanif, your work is work that I have to cut on what you're talking about while I listen to it. Literally cut on Amazing Grace while reading that essay, right?
Yeah.
It felt like you had to, right? Your work, yeah, I'm sorry. I love hearing you talk about your work. I also want to ask, all of your prose books and maybe your poetry collections too, I would argue, have been love letters, whether in name or not, right? And They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. You're hard pressed to find a figure brought up, whether from your life or from just your criticality that you don't love. Go Ahead, Tell It in the Rain is literally called a love letter to the greatest hip hop band of all time. We have Little Devil America in praise of Black performance. What has it done for the development of your work, or have you been able, can you track for us maybe like what has there been an effect in your work by chasing adoration and praise over a maybe pithy white male view of what it means to be a critic? What has it made to be a critic of love for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think more than my work, the one thing I always joke about is that when people got Little Devil in America, one response that I did really appreciate critically, though I don't read reviews, I see bits and pieces, people talking about how it seemed like I was softening or becoming a bit more tender, which was really wonderful to read because, and I attribute that growth to, yes, working and being more critical about love, but also like going to fucking therapy. You know what I mean? Like these kind of things that help me build an empire of love that I just want to tell people about, that I feel like I've become more evangelical in my old age, where I just in my work think that my role is to run to the mountaintop and tell people the good word about something that I enjoy. And that is because it's so divorced from the type of criticism that I grew up with, which was often white critics on high telling people what to listen to and what not to listen to. I was served by that by some point. I mean, I found my way to some of my, I would not have a Wire or X-Ray Specs record behind me if I didn't read about them from someone telling me I should like them, But what I'm more enthused about is giving people a blueprint for affection that has worked for me and then shrugging and walking away, kind of saying, maybe you'll join me on this journey and stumble into something you love that is not what I love, but is something, and we can hold on to that together. I'm more moved by that. I'm propelled by, I'm still probably too cynical of a person in real life, but where love has failed me, where love in its most tangible forms has failed me, I think I've really repurposed the way that love lives in my imagination, because that has not failed me yet. And I really want to keep pursuing that.
Oh, you beautiful motherfucker. Yes, keep pursuing that, Hanif, and we will keep on paying you $16.99, $32.99 for the hardcover. All right, Mateo. So I got questions for you too, nigga.
Man,
so
how am I supposed to follow up? Come on, man.
And I'm gonna make you work too. I'm gonna make you work. All right. So this is what I want to know, okay? Reading your book, right? It is literally like, it's so smart and black in a way, because it is literally a double speak. You are telling the story of Dar, which by the end of the book, if we didn't get those fourth person or those breaking the fourth wall breakaways that were telling us literally how to be successful in business, that I would believe this book was called Run Nigga Run, Never Do Business.
Title, yeah. Let's switch it
up. Right, and so there is this double play, right, where you're both giving us like these like real life tools about how to be a good salesman, while we're also watching this black man who seemed to have no interest in capitalism be crushed under its weight because of his decision to participate in it. And so I'm wondering, what did you walk away with, and what did you want your reader to walk away with in terms of that about capitalism? Was there anything you had to reconcile in order to move further into that complication that the book presents, right? Yeah. How do you really feel, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I've been getting asked that a lot this week, more than the past couple of months, like specifically about capitalism and why Darren, who became Buck, was subjected to that system, which is racist, as every other system in America. Well, it's tough. For me, I decided to have him, work in sales because I'd worked in sales myself. So I was pulling from my own experience, at least in that regard. And I didn't want to make it harder on myself to write this book and use sales as a vehicle for the messages that I wanted to express. I also look at sales as one of the most American things out there, right? Baseball, apple pie, slavery, sales. It's like the original trade. And I found that when you ask someone, quick, think of a salesperson, they'll think of a white male typically. And for me, I believe that who we think of when we think of salespeople is in some ways connected to who we believe deserves opportunity and who represents opportunity in the American psyche. So I wanted to subvert that. Talking about what Hanif said regarding white critics putting him on to so many different people and different modes of listening to music and engaging with it, I felt a lot of white works about sales, right? Wall Street. I liked Wall Street. Wolf of Wall Street. There's a lot of it that was harmful and not good, but there were certain aspects of it that I enjoyed. Boiler Room, even, Death of a Salesman, right? Willie Loman, he was the quintessential salesman. So for me, I thought that it was ripe for disruption, to use a startup word, and also for me to, in some ways, flip it on its head, right? Talking about the title and the multiple meanings, we know what the Black Buck was, historically. And while Darren, who becomes Buck, isn't burning down these workplaces, he's burning down what they symbolize. So that's why, I wanted him to go in there and really fuck shit up. You're right. In the beginning, he had no stake in capitalism, or no conscious stake in capitalism, because we're all engaging with it in one way or another, unless we're like living, in the woods somewhere. And, I don't know how they're eating out there, but that's for them to do. You know what I'm saying? So I wanted to show the disastrous consequences of chasing this American ideal and this American definition of success, where especially Black people have to pay a higher cost in order to achieve it. In terms of how I actually feel, there is another meaning of the title Black Buck. There is a riff on Black wealth and wealth inequality, and how I believe that financial freedom is one path to liberation. Not being the only path, of course. And again, it could be disastrous in certain ways, but it is one that I think that we need to discuss more and figure out how to get our bread up, in ways that are scalable, in ways that not just get people rich, but also enrich our communities and lead to some wealth that can be passed on to other people. The last thing I'll say is that the book is incomplete to a certain extent. At the end of the book, you have Darren. He started this organization called the Happy Campers that's helping Black and brown people infiltrate these American tech startup sales teams, redefining what it means to be a minority in the workplace. But you could walk away thinking, all right, we just got to get into these white majority workplaces, and that's how it's going to fix things. Nah, like us just going up in these places is just going to be making these white people at the top richer, right? I think that one path is to go into these places, learn what we can, then get out. Another path is to not engage and just do something on some FUBU type shit where we're just, creating shit for us and by us and circumventing as much as the system as we can. And then there's other ways that even I'm blind to. So the really last thing I'm going to say is what someone takes away from this book is entirely dependent upon who they are. But one of my goals and one of my intentions was that for any person who has ever been in scenarios like this, where they are the person or one of the few, to know that they're not crazy, they're not paranoid, and they're not overly sensitive when they perceive something to be amiss in these places. And I wanted them to know that they, just like everyone else, deserves the same chance to chase success and in some cases achieve it, however they define it.
Word. Thank you, Mateo. Well said. You did.
You made me work. You made me work.
I did make you work, and you did it. You followed me well. All right. We got a couple audience questions that we're gonna get to, and I'm gonna let a couple audience members, please, if you have any last minute questions before we round out of here, please make sure you get them in. So I'm gonna ask a softball question that might actually be the most contentious question of the night before we hop into these audience joints. So we had a book called Black Buck. First poem in Douglas's book is called Buck. I was thinking about Buck a lot, and so of course this question was gonna come. Who has the best verse on Nuck If You Buck? Crime Mob classic. Who has the best verse? And there's only one answer. Two acceptable answers, I'll say.
Is Lil Scrappy the only acceptable answer?
No, nigga!
That for me, maybe I need to go back. I haven't listened to Nuck If You Buck in a long time because I'm past the phase where I'm in clubs where fights might break out at any moment. But I feel like Lil Scrappy had a good verse.
He did have a good verse. Nigga, I come in the club shaking my dreads, throwing these bows and busting these heads. Diamond and Princess own that song. What?
That's fair. That's fair.
I was
You
gonna.
can't understand what they said. Legit can't understand what they said. It was the best verses. Okay, cool. All right, first audience question. Or wait, do y'all have answers that agree with me, Douglas and Mateo?
Nah, I was gonna defer to Hanif. I mean, whenever I've heard that song, I think something's about to pop off, or
It is.
It's the type of song that someone's getting stabbed. And I mean, yeah, I don't find myself in those scenarios as often lately. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Good question though. Love it.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Shit triggers me from a house party that I went to in like Compton back when I was in high school. So now I ain't.
I think all of you need to revisit Nuck If You Buck. I think there's a wonderful oral history of it somewhere, if I'm not mistaken.
There is. That is very true. There's a great oral history of it. I don't remember where it is, but I remember reading it and actually loving it a lot.
Probably on like NPR. Them niggas be doing like weird, solid black shit sometimes. Okay. One audience question we got. They were asking us if we could dive into a little bit more, and I think this is appropriate because hip hop is indeed performance. Into the hip hop lens. Could you talk a little bit more about the widening of the hip hop lens? Is that symptomatic of the loss of regionality and expansion of the curated experience that Dinez and Douglas briefly mentioned? So could we talk a little bit more about that widening lens of hip hop and how digital age has changed it?
Well, I mean, one, I think it's happened several times, right? The widening hip hop lens began when Sylvia Robinson decided to put out a Sugar Hill Gang record, a physical record, right? And put rap on record. And then a widening of the hip hop lens began in the early 80s, and then again in the late 80s, and then again. But the loss of regionality, but and to be fair, by loss of regionality, this is not, for me at least, on the artists. The artists were clinging to regionality, but the clinging to region. I mean, look, Andre 3000 at the Source Awards. You know what I mean? When the South got something to say, right? So they're clinging to regionality, but hip hop for me became borderless when I could relate to something that someone from Atlanta was rapping about, or when I could listen to the first Snoop Dogg album and say, oh, I think I can visualize that. It became borderless within the imagination first, and then it became borderless in a very tangible way the more digital the world got and the more access I think people had to cross physical borders, which I want to be clear and say I don't think this is a bad thing. I think where hip hop is now is maybe where it was always going to be. It was always going to be America's popular music, and Black folks can't afford to go to the biggest concerts, and that was always going to be the path for it. It was never going to be the blues. In some ways it is, but it was never going to be like the blues, where even in its most rich commodification, there's still a lineage and a touchstone that feels, well, regionally, depending on the blues, that feels very, one step removed from a Black person in a juke joint.
Oh, I mean, like, I know that we got audience questions, but I got to ask Hanif this because he's right here. And this is my first time actually meeting him. What do you think of someone, though, like Drake, who people consider a culture vulture to a certain extent, and this guy's rapping over drill beats from the UK? So when we're talking about things being borderless, do people own things anymore? And if not, what happens? My bad, I'm taking Dinez's job, but like,
no, you good, nigga.
I'm personally curious, like, what do you make of that?
Well, one, I think Toronto's, and I can't speak to Drake's culture vultureness or not, because I feel like it's not fair.
I can.
I think I can't speak fully to it, right? Like, yes, in some ways, no, in other ways. Toronto's a different kind of place. Like, it's actually not that uncommon for some of Drake's styles that he's infused into his work. That's just in the culture there. Now, of course, there are others that are a little bit more contrived, for sure. But I also think questions about appropriation are, to me, the least interesting questions, because they often revolve around aesthetics and not history. Now with Drake, I get that Drake is like entirely aesthetic, so maybe this is the right question for Drake. But beyond that, when folks are talking about, it's normally about like, well, why does Miley Cyrus have gold teeth, instead of like the actual history behind the dislodging of Black music from the hands of Black people, and what the like original sin of that. That's why Go Ahead and Rain started talking about like when the drums got taken from Black folks, because that's actually the question for me. It's not the question of like I don't really give a fuck if Miley Cyrus wears a gold chain.
Or for Doug,
right?
Bantu knots.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, yes, those things, right? Like those things are fodder for conversation, and I understand that, and fodder for memes and jokes, and I'm also with that. But I think those conversations so often skirt history that ask really pertinent questions of how not just America, but globally, we've arrived at a point and have been at a point for beyond all of our lives where Black cultural production is a currency, so much so that to lift it from the Black creators and map it onto someone non-Black is common, not only commonplace, but celebrated.
And lucrative. Facts.
And lucrative. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, look at Korea.
Yeah.
It's full of niggas right now.
Yeah.
K-pop is nothing but us.
Right.
But I will say, I mean, I think on the Drake point, or just about this thing about like regionality, because I think, you know, what's interesting too, and I think it's happened in many art forms, the thing literally happened in like performance poetry, right? Like you can, if you were around for performance poetry before the invention of YouTube, you could hear somebody and say, oh, that poet's from Chicago, that poet's from LA, that poet's from New York. YouTube hits and everybody sounds like everybody, right? Or everybody sounds like who got the most views.
Everybody got a dinosaur in the hood poem.
Yo, Hanif, what you talk about? Everybody got a poem for somebody ending in blah 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 after Hanif
I want to ask another question about the hip hop because like there's like, because hip hop has so many layers of points of identification, right? There's the musical style, there's production, then there's the actual lyrics and the slang and the references. Like, you know, I remember the first time I heard I'll Be That by Redman, and like hearing, you know, my crew does drugs, Dwayne Reed couldn't breathe. I was sitting there going like, oh shit, is that like Ray Ray? Is Dwayne Reed like a hardcore like drug dealer? Oh shit, like, yo, is that like Ray Ray out in LA? And then I go to New York and I'm walking down the street. Oh, Dwayne, it's a damn Walgreens, right? So I mean, like, there is the sound, there is, you know, what, you know, trap, there's drill, like those sounds, but what's being said to me is also a part of where the region kind of comes in. And the region then as a sort of a persona or as a sort of a style that then works as a kind of an indicator of, oh, you're listening to this sound, like whether it was the hand clap in like West Coast music versus a snare versus the, you know, like the rapid hi-hats, like these things become open. But my thing is almost always more interested in like, what does like something like Rap Genius do to the idea of regionality or even just code or encryption, right? What does it mean? What does a page like Who Sampled do towards like making things open in a way that before you'd have to know some other piece of information in order to get that? Like, you know, Denzel Curry's like, I'm gonna act 1, 2, and if I haven't heard the artist he's quoting in that moment, I'm just like, whoa, that's a cool way to start a song. But like, if I'm recognizing like music from Florida, then that's a reference to me that allows me to like hold on. So some regionalism might still be there. Yeah. It's just, it might not be in the production sound.
This is, I think I was heading to, Douglas, is I think like it allows the influence to be open, and any artist with their own salt is still going to add their originality into that influence from someplace else, right? And so, you know, you can kind of tell when somebody's making sort of an empty trap music, right?
Yeah. Because the opposite is also true.
Their spin and stuff on it, right? So like, what the fuck does trap from what's it called? From like Switzerland sound like, you know, like that might actually start to augment and become something different. You know, I think, you know, and you already saw that even before the so-called like loss of regionality. You also saw like cultural sharings, right? Like there's always been a tie between West Coast and Southern rap, right? Particularly Houston, right? You see that returning to like Megan Thee Stallion's album is full of West Coast beats. And that's not a surprise if you know anything about LA's influence on Houston music, you know? And so I think like what we see now is, it actually, I think, is actually a very exciting time for the artists, right? For the audience, it might become confusing to like sort of places regionality and stuff like that. But it actually means that like, oh, if I have access to literally everything as a to respond to, what the fuck can I make?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is the last thing I'll say, because I know we got other questions. One of my favorite rappers right now is a rapper named Dave from the UK.
Bro, I saw Dave in concert. I love Dave.
Incredible. Singularly incredible. And if we're talking about someone who does not, I'm fascinated by him as a writer because he relies on triple entendre often. And
Stratum.
Yeah. So Stratum, right? Like Stratum has that line, that song has a line about my homies cutting through bricks like the 118.
118. Right? Yeah, I love that video too. I watched 2 to 3 hours worth of music videos.
Yeah. In like that 118 thing is wild, but also the 118 is a bus that runs like from bricks into Stratton, right? You know what I mean? So like cutting through bricks. And the 118 is a bus that like 3 years ago crashed through a brick house. So cut through bricks in a brick house. But this stuff, he's not like explaining this.
Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
To an American audience, he's not translating this.
Right.
And that's interesting to me. That's like exciting to me.
Exactly. Because that's that not making it available is you're just like, you're outside for a moment, right? You're outside for that until you learn some other shit. And I mean, like the way people are getting beats now is fundamentally different from before, where you got beats from that person in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
But now it's like you can get beats from anywhere. So again, like it's like locality in hip hop, like you ain't got to rock damn parties in your neighborhood.
Like, they're not lethal right now.
Right? Yeah, exactly. This is true.
The storytelling is borderless. Like when I think of what attracts me to Dave, it's the storytelling, right? I've never been to Redmond, where he's from. It's just like with Loyal Carner. You know Loyal Carner?
Oh yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know everyone. I don't even know why I just asked you. Let me cut it here, like in terms of my contribution, because this is about to turn into a hip hop conversation, which I want, but I know we got some audience Q&A.
Well, unfortunately, we are actually out of motherfucking time. So
there we go.
Takes it to the end.
I will say this, I'm excited, Mateo. I'm excited that someone else knows and appreciates Dave. I think he's gonna have a big moment in the States here in like a few months. Not that he needs to, but I think he is gonna have a big moment soon.
Definitely. You saw him in Top Boy?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He's on Top Boy, which I just find to be the funniest show name for a straight show. Drake just keeping the rumors going for me. Watching, I know we talked almost some shit about you tonight, but I still love you, daddy. Stop talking to them young girls. And he do be texting. Okay, never mind. We don't need to dive into
You do be
that.
texting. You do be texting.
He do be texting. That's enough. Thank you to our wonderful author, Hanif, Mateo, Douglas. Seriously, thank y'all for this conversation. It's been such a bright spot on my day. I feel blessed by it. Thank you to our wonderful authors, to the members of the Loft who make these events possible, to our sponsors at St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune. If you are in this event tonight, that means you gave us your email for some reason, which means you are going to get an email with a survey. Please fill out the survey. We really need folks to fill out the survey. It's coming to your emails directly after this session. Thank you to Steph Opitz, who is our wonderful leader here at the Wordplay Festival. Our founding director, Steph. Hope you and all your gorgeous kids are out there doing fine. Thank you to the beautiful Black authors that we had tonight. Thank you to y'all beautiful Black selves for watching. Even if you weren't Black, you're still beautiful. And thank you for watching too. I send you off into your Friday evenings with blessings. Everybody be well. Have a good night.
Night, everyone.